Welcome to the H.I.T podcast, H.I.T, Human Resources, Insurance, and Technology. I'm your host, Toby Kennedy. As we do every week, we are dropping into your feed with what I hope are bite-sized, digestible, really well-curated conversations going on in the space. This week's episode will be no exception. This week's episode is brought to you by Montage Insurance Solutions. And without any further ado, I bring on Rob McKenna. Dr. Rob, how are you, sir?
I'm doing awesome, Toby. It is good to be here.
It's really great to have you. And I come across guests in different ways. Sometimes, folks are people I've met on LinkedIn. Sometimes folks are people I've known just from years and years professionally. You guys are a really awesome case because our company went and found your company, use your company, love your company. And I went to the person I work with at your company and was like, is there any way, may I beg, plead, and get to the absolute top of your guys' mountain to get Dr. Rob, the guy behind it all, because I'm just such a fan first. So first of all, thank you for all the stuff you do. But second of all, do you mind, Dr. Rob, just give people just a quick overview, kind of who you are, what Wild Leaders is, what you guys do, and bring the audience up to speed on why I'm such a fan.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Toby. That is incredibly humbling. And I mean that to have you say that. And Wild Leaders, WILD stands for Whole and Intentional Leader Development. That's the acronym. And we are in the business of developing whole leaders and deep into the business of measuring trust and building trust. And we found that trust building and that whole process, which of course leans into what it means to develop leaders as a part of that process. But we built an assessment called the WILD Trust Index that organizations are using to get measurable sort of data that says on this thing that feels like a feeling. Quite frankly, for most leaders, they know they can't live without it. But when they reach out to grab it, it's like air. They can't live without it. But when they reach out to grab it, it disappears in their hands. And so when they see that I could actually measure and assess different drivers of trust, it's been an awesome journey. So
yeah,
it's a little bit about that.
And that's exactly what I want to get into. Like, first and foremost, of course, people can hire Wild Leaders and they can do that. And we can do some version of a commercial. But what I really want to do is, folks that are listening, let me talk to you and have Dr. Rob talk about sort of what all it is, just so that you can sort of hear and learn. Wild Leaders, you guys have spent some time, like you said, grabbing something that's so ephemeral and difficult to sort of physically make measurable. You can measure sales. How do you measure trust? And is it even important to measure trust?
Yeah, but can I give you a little bit of my journey and how I got here, if that helps?
Yeah.
Because there's an early stage, there's a mid stage, and then there's a now stage when it comes to Wild Leaders and what we've been doing. And I kicked off as I'm a leadership development guy. That's what I do. I look at a group of people and I look at them and I see, all the developmental things that are going on inside of each of them. So I launched in 2010 something called the Wild Toolkit. It was a set of leadership development assessments, because what I had this opportunity in the early 2000s to be a part of multiple longitudinal studies of leadership across all kinds of different enterprises. And it's interesting when you get involved in longitudinal, like long-term research, and you follow a person or a group of people for quite a while, you start to realize that the development of leadership capacity is a pretty complex, set of variables. It's a lot of things going on. And so I ended up building this platform of assessments to really target all those different variables that, quite frankly, most corporations had already dialed in. They understood that they had the resources to provide full-scale whole leader development. And so I built this set of tools. But Toby, the other part of the truth is that I'm also a gamer. I'm a midlife guy who still games. And so I was kind of in the early 2000s, I was being inspired by the way that gaming platforms were inspiring change and development in gamers by the way that they use data. So it's this combination of seeing into the soul of a person, but then using data as a way to see progress. And so that's what we did for years and years and years. And then in my own developmental journey, I took on investment capital. I had most of my friends were enterprise level leaders. They weren't founders. And so I really didn't have peer mentoring that space. So I had to find mentors. In about 2015, I took on investment capital, which I had never done before, to grow the business. Then it started to grow. And then it was interesting because we had someone come in and study the work that we were doing. Because one of the fundamental things that we were doing differently was instead of leadership development where you send someone to a conference or you send them to a training program, we were developing leader capacity in teams together. And so which shouldn't be rocket science, but it was different in that way. We weren't sending people away. We were having people develop, looking at their own competencies, their own support, their own purpose in line with their work. And what we found was that one of the big factors that was changing as they were doing this internal work and sharing it with others was trust was increasing. Mm. So it got us deep into several years ago into the trust conversation. And I was like, Toby, quite frankly, I hate big outcomes without a pathway to actually building them. It's like, you don't get trust by talking about trust.
Yep.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
You get trust by doing a bunch of other fundamental things that drive trust being growing and being built. And so we built this index that is a 30. It measures the 33 drivers of trust, the personal, team, and organizational level. That's been an incredible insight for leaders to see. But you can tell, like, I'm also a founder, so I relate to founders.
Yeah.
Their own challenge of scale and how important trust is in that conversation.
So I'm super fascinated by reminding everyone, especially today in 2026, when everything is just zipping around at 1,000,000 miles an hour, that some of the big things, the important things, they really, as you said, they can't be microwaved. You can't just walk in and go, I demand trust. It's like, no. There's lots of these little things that, as you said, go into it. And I'd love to hear your take on that.
You mean that concept that you don't get it by just talking about it. It's like a leader who says to you, hey, just trust me.
Right.
Does not make us trust them.
Matter of fact, it almost makes it worse.
Yeah. And it's funny. I was thinking about how I talk about trust. And I think I used to spend a lot more time trying to convince people that trust was important. And now kind of everyone knows, but they don't really know what it means. Like, what does it mean to actually trust someone else? And so that's where it gets kind of interesting. And just to make one pitch for that, like, I would argue we don't do anything without trust. Mm-hmm. Like, we don't even pull out of our driveways. You and I aren't recording right now. My marriage fails. It's like, it's amazing. Like, our businesses can't sustain themselves because customers don't come back if they don't trust us. Everything breaks down. And so it causes you to say, like, so if that's true, then what is it that we do? What is the chemistry of this thing that so often is invisible to us? And so a lot of our work is to make those things that are invisible to us more visible so that we could see those things. And that's what's been the big aha for most of the leaders that work with us, is they go, oh my goodness, I could measure this. And if I could measure it, then could I build it? Because I know I can't live without it.
So, granting your premise that you can't live without it, and the question can I measure it? Like, how do you measure? I know you mentioned the 33 drivers of trust. I know that you guys have a specific, it's like, hey, you can hire wild leaders, but just kind of giving us as a listener a takeaway, how are some of the ways that you measure trust, or how do you guys go about what you do?
So one of the people I got to know more recently was Stephen Covey. And yeah. I went back and I read his book, Speed of Trust.
Hold on really quick. And I don't mean to interrupt. Stephen Covey, the guy that wrote the foreword to your book, sir?
Yes.
So let's also talk about your book in a second, but it's not, you didn't just like come across Stephen Covey. That man wrote the foreword for your book. So God bless you, dude.
Yeah. It was awesome. And when I got to know him and he came on our podcast, one of the things that was interesting, Toby, was in his book, he says you can measure trust over and over again. He published that, I think, 2006. And he says, if you can measure increasing speed and decreasing cost, then you can measure trust. And so he was looking at these outcomes and then backing into trust, which I would argue he's right about. But I asked him, I said, what is the future? What is the next? And he said, we need to understand the drivers. What are the inputs, the things that I can do on the left side of the equation to actually increase the possibility that trust will grow? And just a quick side note. So after that podcast, I got to know him, had a couple of conversations with him, and I called him and I had this thought. I'm like, what if Stephen Covey would write the foreword for my book? And he has a very distinct voice.
Yeah.
Like he sounds like he's out of breath because he's so intense and urgent in the way he talks. And so I call him and he picks up the phone. I go, hey, Stephen, this is, or he picks the phone and he says, this is Stephen.
Yeah.
And I said, hey, Stephen, this is Rob McKenna. We've got to know each other. And then he hung up.
Yeah, right.
And so I call him back and I'm like getting all my guts up because he's not much older than I am. So he's like a peer, but it's Stephen Covey,
Of
right?
course.
So I call him back and he picks up again and he apologizes. He goes, "So sorry, Rob." And I asked him if he'd write. I said at the end of about a 30-minute call, I said, "Would you consider writing the foreword for my book?" And he said, "I can't do that, Rob. My team has said I need to get out of, I got my own book coming out." But he said, "Send me the manuscript."
Yeah.
I sent him the book. And then a week later he got back and he said, "Let's go." And so he read the book. It was amazing. But I
This
think
is actually a decent time though. Talk to me about the book. What's the book about? Like, let's go ahead and get into it while we're on it.
Yeah. So the book is titled Whole Leaders Wild Trust.
Yep.
And it came out just a few weeks ago. And one of the huge blessings that it came out, it debuted as a USA Today national bestseller. And so that was kind of an awesome, awesome thing.
Yeah.
But really the book it provides a framework for basically I downloaded everything that I have learned about what it means to develop whole leaders. And to not only measure, but to build trust.
Yeah.
And I wrote it. One of the things that inspired me to finish it was an advisor and a mentor of mine said, write it as a love letter from every CEO to their people.
Yeah.
Write it as a way to say, this is what I want for us.
Yeah.
So it breaks down this fundamental structure of what it means to build trust within us, between us, and then organizationally, what can I do structurally to increase the possibility that trust will grow?
So if a manager or an HR professional or a leader is listening, what is something you think is very, very important that they can do?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is that that trust, and this came up over and over again. Another person I got to know was Pat Lencioni during this whole trust process. And Pat and I had this conversation where I always say this, we violently agreed on this.
I love
that trust begins within us. And so I think the fundamental thing that I think when I think about HR leaders who are out there responsible and carrying the weight of supporting a culture of trust is that this is where the fundamentals of leadership development that I break down in the book, like quite frankly, there's a whole part 2 is just a breakdown of all these different pathways of what we need to do, that it begins at the individual level. And so that's where our leadership development efforts are literally trust building efforts. And then it's when the development that's going on inside of me bumps into you, if I work with you every day, that it gets very interesting, right? Because now it's about our capacity to tell the truth and what it means to do that. So that's why even helping teams with their conflict management skills is so critical, because we just struggle to tell the truth to one another. So I would say to begin to see all of the things that you are doing as driving trust building. And the last one I'll say, Toby, is this: at the organizational level, we talk about that as conditions around everyone that's creating the possibility that trust will grow. One of the ones that's the funniest to me is that one of the strongest drivers of trust is job clarity. Because we all want our people to be accountable, but it's very difficult to be accountable for a job that's not clear.
Yeah.
And so literally, if your organization does not have clear job descriptions that are actually useful, not ones that you like put on the shelf and put away, but that are living and breathing expressions of what my role is, trust grows. So it's like, if you can see your developmental activities as trust building processes for your people at the individual level, create the conditions where people could tell the truth and see performance. Like, performance is another predictor of trust. And then also create clear roles. There is one other big factor that I'll hold on to that'll probably come up in a minute, but those are some of the places I would start.
Wait, no, I'm not good with teases. What do you mean? What's the big factor? Let's do it.
All right. So one of the things, these threads that has pulled through all 3 levels, think about the personal level, trust building, the team level, like the relational level, and then the organizational level. One of the threads that pulled through as a driver at all 3, and we call those levels circles of trust, was the emotional maturity of the individuals and the leaders. And what I mean by that is the extent to which every person and every team member and every senior leader is both clear about their own convictions and their own identity, so they know who they are, and at the very same time is developing the muscle group to stay connected to who other people are. Does that make sense? So it's like, so
It
we
makes a
define
ton
emotional
of
maturity
sense.
is managing and moving into that paradox of both knowing who I am and what's important to me and communicating that, but also really working that muscle of understanding who you are and what's important to you, especially when the pressure is on or we may disagree.
That is so profound because it's a reminder to us that this is all so connected, right? And I'm like, I'm having so many thoughts at once. I'm having trouble putting them in order. But the idea that, like you said, work that muscle, even when you're busy, even when you have your own deliverables, even when you have your own arguments with the spouse or the kids or whatever, that the other person on your team, the other in this, is also going through their own world, their own life, their own stuff. And so for you to work to stay connected to them and their point of view must, of course, must be so fundamental to trust. It must be a pillar in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think about the number, I mean, there's so many different examples I could give, but the number, let's just take senior leadership teams, for example, who might work for a CEO who is disconnected on one side or the other. Either this person doesn't have a clear sense of who they are and where they're going, or this person is disconnected from where everyone else is going in that capacity. And what happens, the quiet thing that occurs behind the scenes is these senior leaders who are your core team. And whether you're talking about, a first level team or a senior leadership team, what do? They're functioning now in a way that says, I have a foot halfway in and a foot in and a foot out. I'm starting to look for other places to go. I'm not fully committed. My alignment is off. And so when you can actually build that, trust starts to grow. And so that's why I kind of saved that one as this thing that is this through line through all three levels.
That's all the time we have for you on this week's episode. My conversation with the amazing Dr. Rob ran a little bit long, and we want to keep to our commitment to having these episodes be bite-sized, digestible, and of a time frame where you guys can get in and get out. So thank you very much to Dr. Rob for the first half of this conversation, and join us next week for the second half of the conversation. We'll pick right up where we left off next week. This week's episode is brought to you by our sponsors, Rula, Excel Health, True Hue, Montage Insurance Solutions. Those guys helping keep the lights on. We appreciate the heck out of it. We're blessed to be here. Thank you guys for joining us week in and week out. Join us next week. Join us every week. And until next week, make this the best week yet.